Hello everyone, this is Lisa Gokenar and I'm here to deliver a class lecture for a class on the Greek genocide. The subject for this week is going to be gendered violence in the Greek genocide, and we're going to be looking at things like power, identity, and denial in historiography. So to refresh your memory, the Greek genocide refers to the systematic extermination of Ottoman Greeks between 1914 and 1923 in Asia Minor. While mass killings and deportations dominate the narratives, gendered violence, including sexual violence, forced assimilation, and cultural erasure, reveals genocide as a multi-layered process that involves domination and identity reconstruction. So our lecture is going to look at three key questions. How did gendered violence function as a tool of extermination? Why has this dimension been marginalized in historiography? And how does Turkey's continued denial shape scholarly and political discourse? So we're going to situate the Greek case within comparative genocide studies, engage with feminist theory and intersectionality, and explore ethical challenges in discussing sexual violence historically. So the Ottoman Empire's collapse and the conditions of World War I in Europe created conditions for ethnic cleansing. The Committee of Union and Progress, or CUP, pursued a nationalist agenda, to homogenize Anatolia under Turkish Muslim identity. Christian minorities, including Assyrians, Armenians, and the Greeks, were framed as existential threats to that new Turkish identity. So there was pre-war persecution from 1914 to 1916, and this saw deportations and killings in Western Anatolia. And then there were the war years from 1916 to 1918, where violence intensified under wartime cover. And then there was the post-war period, so from 1919 to 1923, and there were atrocities occurring during the Greco-Turkish War, and there were forced population exchanges, and it was just a very dark time. So, for example, in Smyrna, or Izmir, as it was known back then, thousands of Greeks were massacred in 1922 during the city's destruction. Eyewitness accounts describe women and children thrown into the sea while men were executed publicly. In Pontus, Greek villages were burned and men were marched into the interior under lethal conditions. There are a lot of contextual factors that are influencing this at the time. There's the collapse of multi-ethnic empire and the rise of ethno-nationalism. We were seeing all of that in Turkey. There's religious framing, the Christians as traitors and collaborators with foreign powers, and the Muslim Ottomans, or the Muslim Turks, like to use the Christians as scapegoats. And then there were economic motives. So they confiscated Greek property and Greek businesses. This context sets a stage for understanding how gendered violence operated, not just as incidental brutality, but as a calculated strategy to dismantle Greek identity. So gendered violence is not gender neutral. Men and women face distinct forms of persecution. So it's not singularly something that we discuss with women. There were targets. The men were targets as well. So the violence that we saw against men, men were executed in mass or sent to lethal labor battalions. They were forced on death marches. Those labor battalions were designed to work men to death through starvation and exhaustion. And in doing so, by removing the men from the societies, they dismantled the community leadership and the economic stability of the Greek communities in Asia Minor. So, for example, in Amasya, hundreds of Greek intellectuals and clergy were hanged publicly to terrorize the communities and to terrify the people. Violence against women is probably something that jumps to mind more readily when we talk about gendered violence, and it certainly occurred during the Greek genocide. Women were subjected to systemic sexual violence, forced conversions, and abductions. Rape wasn't incidental. It was a deliberate policy to dishonor families and erase ethnic identity at the time. Bear with me for a minute so that I can get my notes straight. So these acts, terrorizing the women like that, had multiple purposes. They included humiliation, assimilation, and psychological terror. Feminist genocide scholarship argues that sexual violence is integral to genocidal intent, not as a byproduct of war, but as an act of war. Women were targeted not only as Greeks, but as bearers of cultural continuity. Their bodies become battlegrounds for ethnic cleansing. It's very sad to think about. Gendered violence also extended to cultural erasure. Women were pressured to abandon their Greek names, the Greek language, and Greek religious practices. Baptismal records were destroyed to sever ties to Christian identity. And as the child of a Greek immigrant, I can tell you that our family records were erased at this time as well, so it's made tracing our roots very difficult. Turkey definitely weaponized gendered violence. It wasn't random, it was strategic. They used it to crush community leadership, killing men, violating women, dismantled family structures and leadership networks. They used it to erase identity. Forced conversions and marriages absorbed women and children into Turkish society, severing cultural and religious ties. They used it as psychological warfare. So sexual violence humiliated families and destroyed morale, making resistance nearly impossible. And they used it for economic and cultural domination, confiscating property while destroying cultural symbols like churches and schools, completed the annihilation of the Greek presence in Asia Minor. And it's something that never returned. The result was cultural genocide. So women as transmitters of language, as transmitters of faith, and as the transmitters of tradition were neutralized, ensuring future generations could or would not retain Greek identity. So early genocide studies focused on diplomatic and military narratives, marginalizing gendered experiences. Feminist scholars have challenged this androcentric lens, emphasizing intersectionality and structural violence. To this day, Turkey persists in its denial. They do that to enhance national identity because admitting genocide undermines the founding narrative of the Turkish Republic. They do it to strengthen their geopolitical interests because recognition remains politically sensitive. And they do it for legal implications. Acknowledgement could lead to reparations. So there are forms of denial. There are various forms that Turkey has used. The official narratives in Turkish textbooks omit or distort events. They just plain don't acknowledge that it happened. They have engaged in diplomatic lobbying against recognition by foreign governments, and they continue to do that. And they have criminalized dissent under Article 301 of the Turkish Penal Code. So, for example, Nobel laureate Orhan Pamuk faced prosecution for mentioning Armenian and Greek killings. This denial is not merely historical. It perpetuates harm by silencing victims and obstructing reconciliation. Scholars debate whether denial constitutes a form of ongoing violence or something else. The politics of recognition also shape international discourse, and while Armenia's genocide has gained broader acknowledgement, the Greek case remains contested, illustrating how power influences historical memory. And again, as I said, as a descendant of a Greek immigrant, I did not know anything about the Greek genocide until I went to my grandfather's village and learned that his village was one of the places where some of this erasure occurred. And so it was shocking to learn that was part of our family history, because he didn't talk about it at all once he came to this country. The Greek case does illuminate patterns of gendered violence in other genocides, like the Armenian genocides, the Bosnian genocides, the Yazidi genocides. It raises critical questions for international law, things that we should consider and could be potential paper topics. Should gendered violence be central to genocide definitions? How do we memorialize atrocities involving sexual violence without sensationalizing or silencing victims? It's a very sensitive topic for the victims and their families. And comparative analysis can help us underscore the need for inclusive frameworks that recognize sexual violence as a core component of genocidal intent. So, the Greek genocide was not only about killing, it was about dismantling identity through gendered strategies. Men were eliminated as protectors, women were violated and absorbed into the dominant culture. Some more thoughts that you could possibly use for your papers. How do feminist and intersectional frameworks reshape genocide studies? What methodological challenges arise in documenting sexual violence historically? And should denial be criminalized under international law? There's a lot of resources out there. There's a series of articles by an AP reporter, Costas Faltates, that you could dig into, and he has firsthand accounts. There's several books, and some of them are required reading for this course. There's also a movie that we could watch. It's a silent movie, but it really stirred emotions in the U.S. It was ravaged Armenia, and it was one of the things that really got the relief agencies in the U.S. talking about what was happening in Asia Minor and speaking about getting involved to help the Greek and the Armenian and the Assyrian refugees. So gendered violence is definitely something that you see in genocide. It's something that we still see today. It's still used, if you look at what's happening in Somalia today. So unfortunately, it's something that's not going away. I think it's something that's understudied, just like the Greek genocide itself. And it was definitely worth a discussion today. So hopefully this was insightful, and I look forward to engaging on this topic further with you as we move along in the course. Thank you very much.